Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're putting on our detective hats to take what is usually seen as the dry world of accounting and turn it into a high-stakes investigation of business survival. So let's dive right into a massive mystery that pretty much every single business leader faces. How do you distinguish actual, real profit from a slow, quiet financial bleed? It's one thing to see money hitting the bank account, right? But how do you actually know if what you're spending on materials and labor is what you absolutely should be spending? Well, the ultimate tool to solve this is standard costing. Think of it as our financial compass. It's that baseline expectation we set right before reality hits. And here's the thing, it isn't just a simple average of your past costs. Why? Because past costs might just be baking in the results of your past mistakes. Instead, this is a meticulously predetermined calculation of exactly how much a product should cost to make under very specific working conditions. Here is the docket for our investigation today. First, setting the blueprint. Next, the investigative process. Then we're dissecting the variances, looking at causes and culprits, and finally, closing the case. All right, let's get into Section 1, setting the blueprint. Because, every good detective really needs to know what normal looks like before they can spot a crime. The contrast between baselines here is absolutely crucial. While an ideal standard assumes this perfect, flawless utopia with zero breakdowns, no idle time, and absolutely no waste, the reality is most companies rely on attainable standards for their day-to-day control. They use these because they actually account for normal, everyday hiccups. Things like expected machine breakdowns and standard material losses. It gives the team a tough but genuinely achievable target that actually motivates them, rather than setting them up for failure. And this brings us to the standard cost card. This is literally our physical blueprint, and it's built step by step from materials, labor, and overheads. By adding up the standard costs of these individual elements, management locks in the total standard cost per unit. That number becomes the absolute rock-solid foundation for budgeting, for pricing, and for the performance investigation we're about to run. Moving right along to Section 2, the investigative process. Blueprint in hand, it's time for the actual detective work. And this process really is just like a literal corporate investigation. We start by setting the expectation from our cost card, then we observe and measure the messy reality. We compare the two to spot the discrepancy, we break that discrepancy down into its parts, and finally, we hunt down the root cause. Now, here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. A variance isn't just some mathematical difference on a spreadsheet. No, it's a glaring red flag screaming that something deviated from our plan. If actual costs come in lower than standard, fantastic, we have a favorable variance. But if costs exceed the standard, we've got an adverse variance. That's a leak in our financial plumbing, and it's one we need to patch immediately. Which brings us to Section 3, dissecting the variances. Let's crack open a real-world case file. Gartex Limited, a company that manufactures Kente cloth. Imagine opening up their books and staring down a massive $10 million adverse direct labor variance. That is a financial five-alarm fire. A number that big is terrifying, but honestly, on its own, it doesn't tell management a single thing about how to actually put the fire out. So we can't just panic at a huge adverse number. We've got to ask the right questions and break these clues down into their smallest possible parts. We literally have to separate the total variance into highly specific categories, just so we know exactly which department we need to pull into the interrogation room. When it comes to materials, we interrogate two very specific angles. First, did our purchasing department simply overpay for the raw Kente thread? That would give us a material price variance. Or did the production floor just waste way too much material during the weaving process, which gives us a material usage variance? Splitting it up like this is genius because it stops the factory workers from taking the fall for the purchasing manager's bad deals, and vice versa. It's the exact same story for labor. We split that variance right down the middle. We check to see if we paid higher rates than we planned, maybe because of sudden wage hikes or a ton of unplanned overtime. That's your labor rate variance. Or we check the labor efficiency variance to see if our workers were just plain inefficient and took way too many hours to weave the standard amount of cloth. Let's head into Section 4, causes and culprits. Time to round up the usual suspects and find out exactly who or what caused these red flags. If your materials are bleeding cash, the culprits often include emergency purchases made at the absolute last minute, terrible stock control,
or maybe buying inferior quality materials that just lead to massive, unavoidable wastage on the floor. Heck, it could even point to outright pilferage and theft happening right under management's nose.
Now, on the labor side of things, we might be pointing the finger at external factors like power outages or machine breakdowns that are just leaving our workers standing around idle. Or the blame could fall entirely on poor workshop supervision leading to inefficiency. It could even be that we deployed a higher, much more expensive grade of worker than our standard cost card originally called for. And this entire investigative process empowers a brilliant concept called management by exception. Basically, this means leaders don't waste their precious time looking at every single little thing. They absolutely do not need to investigate the processes that ran exactly to standard. Actually, scratch that. They shouldn't even look at them. They only target the exact areas where the variances are glaring, which saves immense amounts of time and corporate resources. Finally, Section 5, closing the case. Ultimately, we have to figure out if a clue is actually worth our time to pursue. We don't investigate every single penny, right? We only launch a full inquiry if the variance is material, meaning it's actually large enough to matter to the bottom line. We also double-check if our original standard was even reliable in the first place, and if this specific deviation has a history of popping up frequently. But most importantly, we run a strict cost-benefit check. Is the cost of assigning managers to go investigate this variance actually worth the financial benefit of fixing it? So as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with a thought. The next time a project goes way over budget, are you going to just accept the loss and let hidden inefficiencies slowly drain your business? Or will you use the incredible analytical power of standard costing to uncover the truth? The blueprint is there. The variances are just waiting to be analyzed. And honestly, it's entirely up to you to crack the case.